Thanks. It's great to be here. It's a wonderful event. Am I speaking loud enough? Louder? Okay. I think it's very interesting that I come after the Minister of Education. If you ask anyone in the country what they're worried about jobs, and they're worried about poverty. And education clearly is one of the critical contributors to both. What I try to do at the HSRC, I work at the Human Sciences Research Council, and I bring together a team of people that are trying to put together strong evidence in relation to understanding what feels like quite an intractable problem, this problem of unemployment and poverty, to make sense of it because there's so much misinformation. It's so hard to make sense. There's so much competing information, statistics thrown around. Every day you read something else in the newspaper that seems to contradict what you read yesterday. We try to make sense of what is actually going on and then what to do about it. So then we have teams that work on everything from transport infrastructure to public works to education and so forth. So given that I seem to be the first person to put up some numbers, you haven't been exhausted yet by that, I'd like to put some numbers on the table. It might be useful for discussion later on, and I think that this presentation will be available to the participants. In 2004, the government committed itself to saying we are going to have unemployment and poverty between 2004 and 2014. And for the work that I do, and for many of the people who are involved in this kind of work, it actually helped a lot. While those targets sound very aspirational and sometimes people don't believe in them, it becomes a very important beacon to what it is that we need to do. And we took those very seriously and we said, so what actually do those targets mean? And what would it take to get there? And what would be the pieces of the puzzle where you start to break the problem down so it starts to feel a little less intractable? So the first thing was to say, well, unemployment in 2004 was 28%, and we wanted to get it down to 14%. And by the way, now it's something in the region of 23%. So it's fallen from 28% to 23% now. 5 million new jobs needed to be created over that period. We had actually gone to about 2.5 million until the downturn, and now we've created something like 1.3 million. So that's where we are against the target. Now, alongside that, 40% of the population falls below a notional poverty line. We don't have an official poverty line, but one was proposed by the National Treasury, and about 40% of the population falls below that. So we said, well, maybe having poverty means that 20% of the population falls below that line. I want to point to some stylized facts because it may contribute to some of the discussion today. The first is, if I were to ask you, have we had jobless growth? How many people would say yes? How many people would say yes, we've had jobless growth? Yeah? Now, I'm sorry, here's a graph. But actually, we've had quite intense employment growth while we had economic growth. And it's surprising to people, and the reason for that is that we have such a large unemployment problem that it never feels like enough. It never feels like we're moving fast enough, and we're not moving fast enough. We should be getting to a higher rate of growth and more intense job creation. But in order to start doing something about the problem, you have to start looking at what's successful and what is not successful. If one is always feeling like one's in a crisis, I think of the analogy of somebody who maybe you're 500 kgs and you want to get down to a size 12 and you lose 5 kgs, but you're never going to get there. Here we've got this enormous unemployment problem, and nothing that one does will ever feel like enough. But in the same way that the difficulties in the education system were pointed out, you have to start figuring out where the successes are rising, working on those, working out what's not working, trying to change that, but not to feel overwhelmed that nothing is working. Now, over the past period of years from 1997, in fact, there has been a very rapid rate of employment growth to the point that in 2006 and 2007, we were actually starting to reach our employment target. We were starting to generate 500,000 net new jobs, and unfortunately now there's been a slump. Most people would say that there are no jobs for low-skilled workers, that the job creation that we experienced was very high-skill biased. In fact, the ratio of low-skill and semi-skilled workers to higher-skilled workers has remained around 70 to 30. In other words, about 70% of people who work in the economy are in the low and semi-skill area, and about 30% are in the sort of higher skill technical area. And that ratio hasn't changed that much over the past 10 or 15 years. Now, this is what I mean about misinformation. What people do, an economist, I'm trained as an economist, what you do is you find a percentage change here and a percentage change there, and you trumpet it like it's a major change, but it actually isn't. You're broadly on track with that. Now, the reason for that is that in certain sectors like manufacturing, no doubt, and agriculture, no doubt they've become more skill intensive. But most jobs that get created are in the services economy. They're the kinds of people who work in this type of hotel. It's the cleaners and the security guards and the people who do your hair and your nails and all those service workers, restaurant workers, hospitality. Those are actually where the majority of jobs get created, not just in South Africa, but globally. So the next question that arises, because we read about this a lot, is why isn't manufacturing creating jobs? Where do jobs actually get created? And people get very upset that manufacturing doesn't create more jobs than it does. But the reality is manufacturing is an incredibly important sector of the economy as a spur to growth. But there's nowhere in the world, including China, by the way, where manufacturing is a major source of employment growth. And I include China in that. Of the maybe 100 million jobs that's been created over the past decade, they have to create 10 million jobs a year to keep up with urban unemployment, just to give you a sense of the scale that they work on. 99% of those jobs were in low-level services and not in manufacturing, and that's because of the kind of productivity growth that you see in manufacturing. So what we do is we break down all of the sectors of the economy from agriculture, manufacturing, skill-intensive services like finance, labor-intensive services like the ones I was mentioning, survivalist activity, which is the kind of thing where people sell oranges on the street, the public service, and the public works and special employment programs. And it's important to be keeping your mind on all of these. Now, the reason that I have 3 of those in red is that those are the areas where people earn relatively higher wages than in the other kinds of sectors. And the reason that matters, and I'll come to that, is that working people actually are also skating near the poverty line. So working out how we create more dynamic sectors that enable real wage growth is an incredibly important objective. Now, raising the public service, the minister was also raising the issue of wages. There's a critical problem in the public service, and we've also been working with the Department of Public Service Administration and Higher Education on the question of how the public service could be bringing in more young people. The public service is meant to be playing a special role in any country, and especially one with high unemployment, in drawing in young people. In South Africa, it used to be the main first employer of black graduates, actually, until the early 2000s. And it stopped employing and stopped taking in black graduates. And the important thing is that if you don't have the networks, that can be your first entry point into any kind of employment and then onward to something else. So it's not actually playing that role. And the lower grades of the public service right now, out of maybe 1.2 million people who work in the public service, there are actually only about 30 to 60,000 people. In other words, there's almost no one in that lower range where you would expect some entry of young people. So those are the kinds of strategies we've been looking at there. Now, the important thing, and probably many people who are here probably work in the service sector, and the thing that we struggle with, and certainly no economists have been trained this way, is to understand that services generate more than 70% of all the jobs that get created globally. And we've looked at all high-growth countries, from the low-income ones, the developed ones now. Every single economy is the same. They're all different, of course, but from this perspective, they're the same. And I include China in that the vast majority of jobs that get created are in the service sector. And now manufacturing is a declining proportion of jobs in the economy, and again, that's partly because of technology diffusion globally. Now that counters everything that we've learned. Anybody who has studied development or economics, that's not what how we're trained to think. The statistics don't keep up with it. They would say services aren't traded. Services are traded. 30% of our civil construction is traded. You can trade hairdressing, you can trade advertising, you can trade anything. But the statistics don't tell you that, and therefore we continue to issue information that doesn't reflect what is actually going on. So that makes it very difficult to understand how to promote dynamism and employment along that dynamism. Now, just as one example, when you think about the levers of industrial policy, therefore, and we're thinking about services, how does it differ? The kinds of things that one has to think about, I'll just give you a couple of examples. The movement of people. There are actually trade arrangements around the movement of people. We give away nurses and doctors. We invest in doctors and nurses and teachers and so on, and we give them away effectively. It's like producing steel and handing it away for free. We don't manage the remittances the way countries like the Philippines do, as an example. They produce X plus, 10% perhaps, have trade arrangements, and get remittances back. Similarly, having people flowing in and out, high-skilled people, more easily coming in and out, that's starting to change in our policy, but that becomes a critical aspect of our industrial policy. Similarly, urbanization and a growing middle class, therefore, becomes an incredibly important part of job creation. Almost all jobs happen because of linkages, of things that happen in cities. So the premier's here of Gauteng, that becomes a critical, Gauteng it will be a driver of employment, even though it's a little space. People are coming in here. We have a very large proportion of unemployed in Gauteng and a very large proportion of employed. And the reason is that they come here to look for jobs. But it's those urban, what they call urban agglomerations. Employment is all about one thing leading to another. It's not about a big investment and a big investment. It's about an investment happening and then people being able to come around, share ideas, and start up all kinds of other activities around it. So the better functioning cities are, the ability of people to move around easily, to do deals, to get finance, to get their goods and services to market, those things are actually incredibly important for job creation, but we don't talk about it that much as part of the job creation solution. Now, the role of the state, I spoke about the public service, but there's also this area that we often call public works. It should really be called special employment programs. And globally, that's actually more what it's called. If you were in the ILO, you would call them special employment programs. And the difficulty of calling them public works is that I believe that most of the opportunities will be created in care opportunities. In other words, in the care economy at the community-based level. Now, I think that this event is meant to be in support of Project NOAA, and that's exactly the kind of activity. If it can be stabilized, people are professionalized, and by professionalized I mean they have full-time jobs, they get good at their job, they feel honor in their community, and they continue on. Almost all of the opportunities are actually going to be in areas like early child development, like the kinds of examples the minister was given, in home-based care, checking eyes, getting vitamin A, children getting their vitamin A, nutrition programs, and so on. Now, in this area, a minimum of 1.5 million opportunities are needed at a minimum, and this is actually now the government target. But if we have low growth and we still want to have unemployment, we would need 2.5 million opportunities, which starts to become a little bit absurd. That was half the target that we needed, and that would cost something in the region of 50 or 60 billion rand. That's a huge amount of money. So that shows the imperatives to start doing the things that get the economy going. So no doubt we need these special employment programs, and we need to strengthen community organization. But the need to get the rate of growth up, and I'm not speaking about investment in smelters clearly, I'm speaking about the investments that happen in urban areas that enable entry and competition. Now, who are the unemployed? The issue of youth unemployment is starting to be discussed a lot more, and that's a very good thing. About 3/4 of all unemployed are actually under the age of 35. So effectively, unemployment is a youth unemployment issue. Now, when we look at the downturn and we see that maybe 600 to 800,000 people lost their jobs, about 80% of those people are under the age of 35, and the vast majority do not have a matric. So that, again, speaks to